Hello students, welcome to the channel. In this video, we'll discuss the third passage, the Humanities paired passage of the June 2020 ACT Form C02. So let's begin. Passage A is adapted from the essay Henry D. Thoreau by John Burroughs. Passage B is adapted from the essay Qualified Homage to Thoreau by Wallace Stegner. Passage A. Thoreau's fame has steadily increased since his death in 1862, as it was bound to do. It was little more than in the bud at that time, and its full leaf and flowering are not yet, perhaps not in many years yet. He improves with age, in fact, requires age to take off a little of his asperity and fully ripen him. The generation he lectured so sharply will not give the same heed to his words as will the next and the next. The first effect of the reading of his books upon many minds is irritation and disapproval. The perception of their beauty and wisdom comes later. Okay, so this starts with an overview of Thoreau's work, and Burroughs believes that Thoreau will become more popular and would be read more by future generations because he is a writer who employs asperity, which is to say that he's not a comfortable read. He's not a pleasant read, right? He can induce irritation and disapproval in his readers. He was a man devoid of compassion, devoid of sympathy, devoid of generosity, devoid of patriotism, as these words are usually understood, yet his life showed a devotion to principles such as one life in millions does not show. And matching this, there runs through his works a vein of the purest and rarest poetry and the finest wisdom. For both these reasons, time will enhance rather than lessen the value of his contributions. The world likes a good hater and refuser almost as well as it likes a good lover and acceptor. Only it likes him farther off. So again, that idea that Burroughs speaks about is that Thoreau is not a pleasant writer. He does not mince his words. He can be uncomfortable to read, and yet his writings are full of wisdom and poetry. And so, as we go along, as future generations encounter him, they are likely to prefer his work. In writing of Thoreau, I'm not conscious of having any criticism to make of him. I would fain accept him just as he was and make the most of him, defining and discriminating him as I would a flower or a bird or any other product of nature, perhaps exaggerating some features the better to bring them out. I suppose there were greater men among his contemporaries, but I doubt if there were any more genuine and sincere or more devoted to ideal ends. If he was not this, that, or the other great man, he was Thoreau, and he fills his own niche well. And he has left a positive and distinct impression upon the literature of his country. He was perhaps a little too near his friend and master Emerson and brought too directly under his influence, but the contour of his moral nature was just as firm and resisting. He was no more a soft-shelled egg to be dented by every straw in the nest than was his distinguished neighbor. So here he kind of puts Thoreau in the historical context of his time, right? He kind of says that he perhaps was not the greatest man of his time, and yet he was a man who was sincere, who was devoted to certain ends, certain principles that he stuck to. And it also talks about Emerson, who had influenced Thoreau, and that influence, the level of that influence is debatable, but there's no denying that Thoreau was his own man, and that he might have been influenced by Emerson, but he had his own ideas, he had his own opinions. Okay, questions 21 to 23 are about the first passage. The main idea of the first paragraph of passage A is that Thoreau's lectures are still taught despite students' disapproval of the topics. More significant works of literature have been overshadowed by criticism of his personality. Literature will continue to increase in value and relevance for future generations. Literature is more appreciated than Emerson's literature is. So this is C, right? because he categorically states that future generations will probably find greater value because there would be distance between his writing and them. Passage A states that although readers may not initially approve of Thoreau's books, they will ultimately appreciate his writings for its sympathy and poetry, patriotism and devotion, generosity and compassion, beauty and wisdom. So it's J, right? He says that his writings are wise. Right. Yeah. There runs through his works a vein of the purest and rarest poetry and the finest wisdom. So his writings are beautiful and wise. Based on passage A, the author's only criticism of Thoreau is that he might have been too heavily influenced by Emerson. His literature focuses more on refusal than acceptance. He was less talented than his contemporaries were. He was overly quick to judge those whose moral nature differed from his own. So I don't think D is relevant. And he has left a positive, and he was perhaps a little too near his friend and master and brought too directly under his influence. So it is about Emerson. Option A. Okay. Passage B. Walden Woods is the 2680 acres area outside of Boston that inspired Thoreau's book Walden. Before I get around to saying why I think that Walden Woods absolutely must be preserved from subdivision and development, let me confess that much as I admire Thoreau's hard-mouthed intellectual integrity and his naughty grappler's mind, I have some reservations about him. There are writings of his that I admire more than Walden, the essay Walking, for example, which is superb from first line to last, and Civil Disobedience, though this latter is as explosive as dynamite caps and should not be left around where children might find it and play with it. Reading Walden, I'm alternately exhilarated and exasperated, as some of the author's contemporaries were with the man himself. In one paragraph, he may say something that has been waiting 1,000 years to be said so well. In the next, he's capable of something so outrageous that it sets my teeth on edge. So I think this author, one, he's more specific, right, than the first one. He actually speaks about particular writings of Thoreau, like Walden, Walking, and Civil Disobedience. And he also, but I don't think his response is very different from Burroughs' response, right? Burroughs is not unanimously appreciative of Thoreau, right? Burroughs is open to the idea that he can be a difficult writer to read. In fact, Burroughs' first paragraph is about the asperity of Thoreau's writings. And that is something that is brought out here as well, that that his writing was uneven. His writing, in one paragraph, he could say something as so profound that you wondered why nobody else had said it so far. And in the next paragraph, he would say something outrageous and make you wonder if it was the same person writing it. With the Thoreau who observed and participated in nature, the Thoreau who loved wildness, and the Thoreau who trusted physical labor so long as it was not a compulsion, and who mistrusted material ambition, I'm completely in accord. It is Thoreau, the moralizing enemy of the tradition to which he owes all his own authority, and puts me off. So here, the writer speaks about aspects of Thoreau's personality that he admires, the love for nature, the love for wildness, the love for physical labor. But then there were aspects that he did not like. For example, he was an enemy of tradition, and he was a moralizing enemy of tradition. He could be pedantic, it could be didactic, and that was something that the writer doesn't like. Like any zealot, he's intemperate. At times, he sounds perilously like his spiritual descendants of the 1960s who trusted no one over 30 and believed that they existed outside of and were exempt from the society they were protesting. What I miss in him, as I missed it in the more extreme rebels of the 60s, is the acknowledgement that their society shaped them, that without it, every individual of them would be a sort of a Sasquatch, a solitary animal without language, thought, tradition, obligation, or commitment. It is culture, tradition that teaches us to be human, teaches us almost everything, including how to protest and what to protest about. So here, the writer makes a comparison between Thoreau and the rebels of 1960s. I think he speaks about those who protested the Vietnam War and the counterculture and the hippie era. And he says that he has a problem with both because both Thoreau and these rebels seem to suggest that they are apart from the society that they criticize, right? That they are away, that they are different from those that they criticize. And that doesn't make sense because it is the society that they criticize that has shaped them, right? They come from a culture, a tradition, and it is that tradition that has shaped them enough to criticize it. So it's not that these writers, that Thoreau and these rebels exist in a vacuum. I never hear Thoreau admitting this. In fact, he often specifically denies it, and his denials raise my temperature. How about a little well-deserved humility? I feel like asking him. It is like arguing with the television screen, but it eases the mind. The fact is, it is precisely Thoreau's repudiation of the dead hand of the past that makes him so excruciatingly American. He pretends to believe that all experience is not merely fruitless, but damaging. Men think they are wiser by experience, that is, by failure, he remarks in Walden. I've always been regretting that I was not as wise as the day I was born. So I think the second author overall takes a more critical tone towards Thoreau, right? Certainly more critical than the first author does. But I think he's also a more involved participant in Thoreau's writings because he is frustrated by Thoreau's lack of acknowledgement of the past as a shaper of men. And I think that is something that puts the second writer off, even though he is completely and deeply connected with the writings. Okay, questions 24 to 27. Which of the following statements best describes how the author of the second passage feels about Thoreau compared to how the author of passage B feels about Walden Woods? Okay, Walden Woods, right? So this is, I think that Walden Woods absolutely must be preserved. I have some reservations about him. Okay. He rejects Thoreau's ideals and therefore does not see the value in preserving Walden Woods. He embraces Thoreau's ideals but does not make clear his stance on the preservation. He believes that Thoreau's contemporaries were more talented, therefore does not think it necessary to preserve. He disagrees with some of Thoreau's ideals, but still considers the value of preserving Walden Woods, right? So he definitely thinks that this place should be preserved as homage to Thoreau, but he obviously disagrees with some of what Thoreau says. Based on passage B, the author's main criticism of Thoreau is that Thoreau mistrusts material ambition, is more interested in maintaining the status quo than in inciting change, denies the influence that society has had on him as an individual, writes about concepts that are inappropriate for a younger audience. So it's C, right? That's his main criticism, that Thoreau is completely oblivious, or rather completely denying of the influence that society has had on him. It can reasonably be inferred that the dead hand of the past mainly refers to, the dead hand of the past that makes him so excruciatingly American. American cultural tradition, Thoreau's Walden, protesters in the 1960s, and the development of Walden Woods. So this is, he pretends to believe that all experience is not merely fruitless, but damaging. Repudiation of the American cultural tradition. Obviously, he thinks that he is, what is the word that I'm looking for? He's sui generis. He's one of his kind, and he has emerged from a vacuum. The author of passage B compares Thoreau to a television screen, most likely to indicate that arguing with Thoreau is futile, right? It's futile because it's, it's like arguing with the television screen because it's futile, because, you obviously, that doesn't serve any purpose. Okay, compared to the author of Passage A, the author of Passage B provides more specific information about the opinion Thoreau's contemporaries had of his writing, professional relationship Thoreau had with Emerson, themes that Thoreau explored in his work, reasons for Thoreau's increasing fame. So I think it's H, right? Because the second person is kind of more, he provides greater detail about, you know, what Thoreau wrote about and how he kind of saw himself as devoid, as detached from the American literary and cultural tradition. Compared to the assessment the author of Passage B makes about Thoreau's writing, the assessment author A makes can best be described as more complimentary, critical, unbiased, unenthusiastic. I think it's more complimentary. I'm not conscious of having any criticism to make of him, right? He doesn't criticize him. So it's more complimentary. I don't think it's biased. I don't think it's unbiased. It's definitely complimentary. Which of the following statement best captures the main difference in the purposes? Passage A predicts Thoreau's legacy as a writer, while Passage B evaluates the soundness of some of Thoreau's ideals. Passage A provides an example of one literary critic's opinion of Thoreau, while Passage B provides examples of several critics. So that's definitely not it. Passage A questions Thoreau's literary clout, while Passage B explains why Thoreau is an exceptional American writer. No. Compares Thoreau to a product of nature. Right. So it's F. Because we are talking about his legacy. The first passage says that he would be appreciated more by future generations than his own. And the second obviously looks at the soundness of some of his ideals, and specifically this idea that, he saw himself as an individual that was distinct from his society. Okay, so that was the passage. Let's grade this. Where is this thing? Okay. So this is 21 to 30, right? That's what I'm looking at. So CJAJC, CJAJC, FBHAF, FBHAF. Okay, so we got all correct. Hope this exercise was useful. If it was, hit like and subscribe to the channel. I'll see you guys in a new video soon. Take care. Bye-bye.